When 17-year-old Elara Thompson stepped onto the grand debate stage at Harvard University wearing her janitor mother's worn-out, hammer-down shoes, the audience chuckled. Judges whispered to each other. Elite students in tailored blazers and expensive watches exchanged smirks. One even leaned back in his chair and muttered, "This should be quick." But Elara didn't flinch. She adjusted the crooked MIC, locked eyes with the front row, and said just one sentence, so sharp, so shattering, that silence fell like thunder. What followed was something no one in that historic hall would ever forget. Before we begin, like this video and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring you more powerful stories like this one. Now let's begin. The air inside Sanders Theatre crackled with tension and prestige. Marble pillars loomed high. Velvet curtains framed the stage in deep crimson, and mahogany gleamed under golden spotlights. This was a Harvard National Debate Invitational, the Super Bowl of student intellect. Parents in designer suits filled the balcony. Cameras rolled. Anxious competitors fidgeted with ties and adjusted dresses. Names like Preston Whitmore and Langley echoed across the program list. These were legacy kids, the sons and daughters of senators, CEOs, and Nobel Prize winners. And no one expected the girl in the back row to even speak, let alone compete. Elara Thompson sat silently, gripping her frayed notebook. Her name tag, printed on the wrong-colored badge, read alternate. She was only there because someone dropped out the night before. Her mother, Vanessa, had mopped Harvard's marble floors for 15 years. Elara knew every inch of the campus, not from lectures or orientation tours, but from trailing her mother's janitor cart through hushed corridors at midnight. Then, as the final round began, a Harvard coordinator stepped forward with a clipboard. "Replacement for District 12, Elara Thompson," she called. The room paused. A few heads turned. When Elara stood, a quiet wave of laughter rippled through the theater. Her faded cardigan hung loosely over a second-hand dress 2 sizes too big. Her shoes, her late grandmother's, clicked unevenly against the polished stage floor. One judge, Professor Langston, leaned toward his colleague and whispered, "This'll be over in 2 minutes." Elara heard it, every word, but she kept walking. She placed her notebook on the podium, took a deep breath, and looked out at a sea of expectant faces, all waiting for her to stumble. Across from her stood Blake Whitmore III, dressed in a custom blazer, smirking as if he'd already won. And then it happened. Elara cleared her throat and said, "The measure of intellect is not where you begin, but whether you rise when the world tells you to sit." The room froze. Phones dropped. Pens halted midday. Even the moderator blinked, caught off guard. Her voice was calm, yet carried force. Not loud, but sharp. Not angry, but undeniably clear. It was the voice of someone who had listened through janitor doors, who had read discarded textbooks in cleaning closets, who had practiced rebuttals to invisible crowds while scrubbing lecture halls. And though she didn't know it, someone in the audience had already started live streaming. Within minutes, the clip of the janitor's daughter facing off against Harvard's prodigy began to spread. But in that moment, Elara saw none of it. She saw only the front row, the same people who had laughed and smiled, because now she had their full attention. And that was only her opening line. The moderator, stunned into silence for a beat too long, finally gave a small nod. Elara didn't shuffle through notes. She didn't glance at her opponent. She just began. Her voice sliced through the chamber like a violin bow, smooth, confident, deliberate. Her argument wasn't rehearsed in elite prep academies or shaped by expensive tutors. It was forged through lived experience, through nights watching her mother get denied health care because she worked without benefits, through long bus rides where lawmakers referred to families like hers as burdens and statistics. Elara didn't just talk about education inequality, she embodied it. She broke down how standardized testing wasn't built to find brilliance but to reward privilege. She cited obscure legal cases with fluency. She referenced economic trends and dates as if she had swallowed entire encyclopedias. But it wasn't just what she said. It was how she said it. Each sentence built upon the last. Each pause cut deeper. She didn't plead. She didn't brag. She invited the audience into a world they had never dared to enter and made them sit in it. Across the stage, Blake Whitmore III's smirk began to fade. He tugged at his cufflink. He leaned in to whisper something to his teammate. For the first time in his life, he was no longer the smartest person in the room, and it showed. When it was Blake's turn to respond, his voice was clear, his delivery polished. But something was missing. His words felt like memorized lines. Flawless, yes, but cold. He quoted philosophers, used perfect buzzwords, gestured like a future senator. But he had no soul behind his speech. While Elara had defended people, Blake defended numbers, and everyone in the room felt the difference. In the front row, Professor Langston no longer sat back. He was scribbling notes with intensity. Next to him, Dean Harris leaned toward a colleague and whispered, "Who is this girl?" Meanwhile, in the back of the theater, a graduate student named Tori was still live streaming. Her phone buzzed uncontrollably as comments flooded in. "Who is she?" "This girl is eating Harvard alive." "Janitor's daughter? You mean future senator." But Elara remained focused. She closed her final argument with a line that hit harder than any citation, any statistic. "If knowledge is power, then access is justice, and I will not debate my right to both." Silence. And then, something rare happened in a room like this. Applause. Thunderous. Uncontainable. The moderator raised a hand to pause it, but the energy hung in the air like summer thunderclouds. Blake's team sat stunned. Judges exchanged glances. And in that moment, Elara didn't need a trophy. She already knew something had shifted, not just in the room, but everywhere. The applause faded, but its weight remained. Elara stood still for a beat longer, letting the last note of her words settle into the very floorboards her mother had once scrubbed. Her fingers trembled slightly on the podium, not from fear, but from the release of everything she had buried just to survive. She took a breath, nodded once, and returned to her seat without even glancing at Blake. The judges called for deliberation. The finalists were escorted backstage. Elara followed quietly, a few staffers exchanging looks behind her. A volunteer offered her a bottle of water, not with pity, but with something new, respect. Pure, undiluted respect. She accepted it with a polite thank you and sat down in the furthest corner backstage, pulling out her frayed notebook. She didn't know she was going viral. She didn't know her words had already started a movement. But she had known one thing the moment she stepped onto that stage. This was her moment, and she had earned it. Her notebook sat quietly on her lap, pages filled with handwritten outlines, half-erased quotes, and fervently scribbled arguments. Taped to the front cover, barely hanging on, was a photo of Elara and her mother, Vanessa, smiling in their tiny apartment kitchen. Dollar store streamers draped awkwardly in the background, but their joy was genuine. It had never needed much space to shine. Behind the curtain, Blake Whitmore III stood stiffly, whispering to his coach with the panicked calm of someone trying to rewrite a loss before it landed. His once flawless confidence had cracked. The pride that had carried him through elite schools and polished panels had been pierced, not by aggression, but by a girl in borrowed shoes and unpolished words that hit deeper than any polished rebuttal ever could. In the front rows, the whispers grew louder. Parents who had come to cheer for their legacy children were now leaning toward one another, asking, "Who is she?" One well-dressed woman turned to another and asked, "Did she say her mother's a janitor here?" The other nodded slowly, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Yes." Meanwhile, a journalist from the Harvard Crimson, the university's student-run paper, had begun typing furiously. The story was writing itself. 20 minutes later, the finalists were called back on stage. Elara walked out with her shoulders back and her chin high. She had never worn a crown, never walked a red carpet, never even dared to feel like she belonged in rooms like this. But in that moment, she did belong, more than anyone else. The same theater that had once met her with laughter now waited for her every step with reverent silence. At the podium, the head judge stepped forward and adjusted the MIC this year's final round. He began, was one of the most intellectually and emotionally compelling debates we've seen in over a decade. The decision was not easy. Both teams performed at an elite level, but one voice stood out for clarity, depth, and courage. The pause that followed stretched tight, like the breath before an avalanche. The winner of the 2025 Harvard National Debate Invitational is Thompson. Gasps rippled across the hall, quickly followed by cheers. A moment later, a standing ovation erupted. Elara blinked, stunned, Then slowly, almost as if afraid the moment might disappear if she moved too quickly, she stood. The judges clapped. Even Blake's teammate offered hesitant applause. Only Blake remained frozen, his jaw clenched, fists tight at his sides. A golden plaque was handed to her. She accepted it with both hands. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but she didn't cry, not yet. Instead, she turned toward the audience and found her mother standing in the back, still in her custodian's uniform, hands pressed over her mouth. Elara gave her a small, proud smile, the kind only a daughter can give and only a mother can understand. But what happened after that moment would launch her story far beyond the ivy-covered walls of Harvard. The video of Elara's opening line had already passed 1 million views before she left the auditorium. By the time she stepped into the cool Cambridge air, her name was trending on every major platform. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, each platform flooded with clips of her speech, close-ups of her steady expression, and screenshots of her standing tall beside the Harvard logo. Headlines fell like dominoes. Janitor's daughter wins Harvard debate. Teenage girl silences Ivy League with one sentence. Who is Thompson? Elara had no idea. She walked beside her mother, hand in hand, toward the same old city bus stop. The golden plaque felt heavier than it looked. Vanessa hadn't spoken since the announcement. She just kept squeezing Elara's hand so tightly her fingers ached, but she never let go. As they waited, a man in a tailored suit jogged across the quad. Elara Thompson, he asked breathlessly. He introduced himself as a journalist from a national network. He had watched the entire final round from a press section and asked if she would be willing to do a televised interview. Elara hesitated, unsure how to respond. Her mother answered for her. She needs time to breathe. By nightfall, her speech had reached cable news. Talk show hosts quoted her final argument. Influencers filmed emotional reactions. A U.S. Congresswoman reposted a video clip with the caption, "I would be proud to stand beside this young woman in any courtroom, any day." Her high school principal left 4 voicemails, asking her to return for a welcome home rally. Ivy League professors sent her messages on LinkedIn. A publishing house emailed her a book offer. But the moment that truly changed everything came the next morning. Elara woke up in the small room she shared with her mother. The golden plaque sat next to a half-eaten granola bar on the nightstand. She opened her cracked laptop and checked her inbox. Among the hundreds of unread messages, one subject line stopped her heart. Harvard University, scholarship offer. She clicked. Elara Thompson, in light of your extraordinary display of intellect and leadership at our debate invitational, we would be honored to offer you a full academic scholarship to Harvard University, effective immediately. She read it again. Then again. Her hands trembled. Just then, her mother walked in with a tray of toast. "Mom," Elara whispered, I think they just gave me a full ride." Vanessa froze. Her eyes locked onto her daughter's. For the first time in Elara's life, her mother's strength cracked. Tears spilled freely. Without a word, she crossed the room and pulled Elara into a hug, the kind of embrace that generations are built on. Word spread fast. News anchors reported the Harvard Scholarship live on air. Elara's story became a symbol of hope, of voice, of possibility. Schools across the country began playing her speech in classrooms. Universities reviewed their outreach policies. Teachers pinned her photo beside quotes from Malala and Maya Angelou. And 3 days later, Elara stood once again on Harvard's campus, but this time not as a competitor. She was a guest of honor. The university had organized a public forum on educational equity. They had asked Elara to open the event. She arrived in a borrowed navy blue dress, her hair neatly braided by her mother that morning. A student volunteer escorted her through the same hall she had once silently cleaned beside a janitor's cart. This time, every head turned, not in amusement, but in admiration. The auditorium was full. Professors, students, journalists, even government officials filled the seats. The same judges who once dismissed her now waited eagerly. Cameras turned. Mics adjusted. When Elara stepped up to the podium, the room fell silent. Not a cough, not a whisper, just breathless anticipation. She began, not with statistics, not with citations, but with a story. When I was 11, my mother and I were cleaning a lecture hall late at night. I found a debate textbook in the trash. I took it home. I read it every night under a flickering light bulb, not because I thought I'd ever use it, but because the words inside made me feel powerful. That's what knowledge does. It reminds you that you matter. The audience leaned in. Her voice wasn't louder than before, but it was stronger, firmer, certain. She spoke about unseen students, those who walk to school on aching feet, who study with empty stomachs, who do not raise their hands because they've been taught to believe they are invisible. She spoke for them, to them, and with every word, she planted something deeper than applause. She planted belief. Halfway through the speech, someone in the front row stood up, then another, then a third. A wave rippled through the auditorium until the entire room was on its feet before she had even finished. They didn't clap out of politeness. They clapped because she had touched something undeniable. After the event, as she stepped outside into the courtyard, a sleek black car pulled up. A man in a suit emerged and approached her. Elara Thompson. She nodded. I represent the Rhodes Trust. We saw your debate. Read your interviews. Watch your speech just now. We would like to nominate you for a Rhodes Scholarship, full ride to Oxford University. You wouldn't just study policy, you would help shape it. Elara blinked. Her mother gasped. Before she could speak, he handed her an envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter from a retired senator. You reminded me why I entered public service. If you ever decide to run for office, I will be the first to support you. That night, back in their small apartment, Elara sat on the floor, surrounded by flowers, letters, and opportunity. Her mother quietly hung the golden plaque above their kitchen table, where they once ate in silence. Now, it would remind them of a voice that refused to be ignored. From janitor's daughter to national icon, Elara's journey had become more than a story. It had become a movement, and that movement had only just begun.